Hello, this is Corinne from North Balford Library with Lakeland Library Region, back with our 5th episode of our kids book club, where we are reading Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. Today I will be reading chapters 14 and 15, and what I'm going to do to make this a little bit more interactive is I will post a question onto the North Balford Library Facebook page, so that we can hopefully have a little bit more of a discussion about this. Again, our background music today is Ben Sound, which is royalty-free music, and the song title is called Acoustic Breezes. Let's get started. Chapter 14, Anne's Confession. On the Monday evening for the picnic, Marilla came down from her room with a troubled face. "Anne," she said to that small personage who was shelling peas by the spotless table and singing Nellie of the Hazel Dell with a vigor and expression that did credit to Diana's teaching. "Did you see anything of my amethyst brooch? I thought I stuck it in my pincushion when I came home from church yesterday evening, but I can't find it anywhere." I saw it this afternoon when you were away at the Aid Society," said Anne a little slowly. "I was passing your door when I saw it on the cushion, so I went in and looked at it." "Did you touch it?" said Marilla sternly. "Yes," admitted Anne. "I took it up and pinned it on my breast just to see how it would look." "You had no business to do anything of the sort. It's very wrong for a little girl to meddle. You shouldn't have gone into my room in the first place, and you shouldn't have touched a brooch that didn't belong to you in the second. Where did you put it?" "Oh, I put it back on the bureau. I had it on a minute. Truly, I didn't mean to meddle, Marilla. I didn't think about it being wrong to go in and try on the brooch, but I see now that it was, and I'll never do it again. That's one good thing about me. I'll never do the same naughty thing twice." "You didn't put it back," said Marilla. "That brooch isn't anywhere on the bureau. You've taken it out or something, Anne." "I did put it back," said Anne quickly. Pertly, Marilla thought. "I just don't remember whether I stuck it on the pincushion or laid it on the china tray, but I'm perfectly certain I did put it back." "I'll go and have another look," said Marilla, determining to be just. "If you've put that brooch back where it's there still. If it isn't, I'll know you did it. That's all." Marilla went to her room and made a thorough search, not only over the bureau, but in every other place she thought the brooch might be. It was not to be found, and she returned to the kitchen. "Anne, the brooch is gone. By your own admission, you were the last person to handle it. Now, what have you done with it? Tell me the truth at once. Did you take it out and lose it?" "No, I didn't," said Anne solemnly, meeting Marilla's angry gaze squarely. "I never took the brooch out of your room, and that's the truth, if I was to be led to the block for it, although I'm not very certain what a block is. So there, Marilla." Anne's "so there" was only intended to emphasize her assertion, but Marilla took it as an act of defiance. "I believe you are telling me a falsehood, Anne," she said sharply. "I know you are. There now, don't say anything more unless you're prepared to tell the whole truth. Go to your room and stay there until you are ready to confess." "Will I take the peas with me?" said Anne meekly. "No, I'll finish shelling them myself. Do as I bid you." When Anne was gone, Marilla went about her evening tasks in a very disturbed state of mind. She was worried about her valuable brooch. What if Anne had lost it? And how wicked of the child to deny having taken it, when anyone could see that she must have. With such an innocent face, too. "I don't know what I wouldn't sooner had happen," thought Marilla as she nervously shelled the piece. "Of course, I don't suppose she meant to steal it or anything like that. She's just taken it to play with or help along that imagination of hers. She must have taken it, that's clear, for there hasn't been a soul in that room since she was in it, by her own story, until I went up tonight. and the brooch is gone. There's nothing, sure. I suppose she's lost it and is afraid to own up for fear she'll be punished. It's a dreadful thing to think she'll tell falsehoods. It's a far worse thing than her fit of temper. It's a fearful responsibility to have a child in your house you can't trust. Slyfulness and untruthfulness. That's what she's displayed. I declare I feel worse about that than the brooch. If only she had told the truth about it, I wouldn't have minded so much. Marilla went to her room at intervals all throughout the evening and searched for the brooch, without finding it. A bedtime visit to the east gable produced no result. Anne persisted in denying that she knew anything about the brooch, but Marilla was only the more firmly convinced that she did. She told Matthew the story the next morning. Matthew was confounded and puzzled. He could not so quickly lose faith in Anne, but he had to admit that circumstances were against her. "You're sure it hasn't fell down behind the bureau?" was the only suggestion he could offer. "I've moved the bureau and taken out the drawers, and I've looked in every crack and cranny," was Marilla's positive answer. "The brooch is gone, and that child has taken it and lied about it. That's the plain, ugly truth, Matthew Cuthbert, and we might as well look it in the face." "Well, now, what are you going to do about it?" Matthew asked forlornly, feeling secretly thankful that Marilla and not he had to deal with the situation. He felt no desire to put in his oar this time. "She'll stay in her room until she confesses," said Marilla grimly, remembering the success of this method in the former case. "Then we'll see. Perhaps we'll be able to find the brooch if she'll only tell us where she took it, but in any case, she'll have to be severely punished, Matthew." "Well, now, you'll have to punish her," said Matthew, reaching for his hat. "I've nothing to do with it, remember. You warned me off yourself." Marilla felt deserted by everyone. She could not even go to Mrs. Lynde for advice. She went up to the east gable with a very serious face, and left it with a face more serious still. Anne steadfastly refused to confess. She persisted in asserting that she had not taken the brooch. The child had evidently been crying, and Marilla felt a pang of pity, which she sternly suppressed. By evening, she was, as she expressed it, beat out. "You'll stay in this room until you confess, Anne. You can make up your mind to that," she said firmly. "But the picnic is tomorrow, Marilla," cried Anne. "You won't keep me from going to that, will you? You'll just let me out for just the afternoon, won't you? Then I'll stay here as long as you like afterwards, cheerfully. But I must go to the picnic." "You'll not go to picnics nor anywhere else until you've confessed, Anne." "Oh, Marilla!" But Marilla had gone out and shut the door. Wednesday morning dawned as bright and as fair as if expressly made to order for the picnic. Birds sang around the Green Gables. The Madonna lilies in the garden sent out whiffs of perfume that entered in on viewless winds at every door and window, and wandered through halls and rooms like spirits of benediction. The birches in the hollow waved joyful hands, as if watching for Anne's usual morning greeting from the east gable. But Anne was not at her window. When Marilla took up her breakfast to her, she found the child sitting primly on the bed, pale and resolute, with tight shut lips and gleaming eyes. "Marilla, I'm ready to confess." "Ah!" Marilla laid down her tray. Once again her method had succeeded, but her success was very bitter to her. "Let me hear what you have to say, Anne." "I took the amethyst brooch," said Anne, as if repeating a lesson she had learned. "I took it just as you said. I didn't mean to take it when I went in, but it did look so beautiful, Marilla. When I pinned it on my breast, I was overcome by an irresistible temptation. I imagined how perfectly thrilling it would be to take it to Ottawa and play I was the Lady Cordelia Fitzgerald. It would be so much easier to imagine I was the Lady Cordelia if I had a real amethyst brooch on. Diana and I made necklaces of roseberries, but what are roseberries compared to amethysts? So I took the brooch. I thought I could put it back before you came home. I went all the way around the road to lengthen up the time. When I was going over the bridge across the lake of shining waters, I took the brooch off to have another look at it. Oh, how it did shine in the sunlight! And then when I was leaning over the bridge, it just slipped through my fingers. So, and went down, 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 all purpley and sparkly, and sank forevermore beneath the lake of shiny waters. And that's the best I can do at confessing Marilla. Marilla had felt hot anger surge into her heart again. This child had taken and lost her treasured amethyst brooch, and now sat there calmly reciting the details thereof without the least compunction or repentance. "Anne, this is terrible," she said, trying to speak calmly. "You are the very wickedest girl I have ever heard of." "Yes, I suppose I am," agreed Anne in tranquility. "And I know I'll have to be punished. It'll be your duty to punish me, Marilla. Won't you please get it over right off, because I'd like to go to the picnic with nothing on my mind." "Picnic indeed! You'll go to no picnic today, Anne Shirley. That will be your punishment. And it isn't half severe enough for either what you've done." "Not go to the picnic!" And Anne sprang to her feet and clutched Marla's hand. "But you promised me that I might. Oh, Marla, I must go to the picnic. That's why I confessed. Punish me any way you like, but that. Oh, Marla, please let me go to the picnic. Think of the ice cream. For anything, you know, I may never have a chance to taste ice cream again." Marla disengaged Anne's clinging hands stonily. "You needn't plead, Anne. You are not going to the picnic, and that's final. No, not a word." Anne realized that Marla was not to be moved. She clasped her hands together, gave a piercing shriek, and then flung herself face down on the bed, crying and writhing in an utter abandonment of disappointment and despair. "Oh, for the land's sake!" gasped Marla, hastening from the room. "I believe that the child is crazy. No child in her senses would behave as she does. If she isn't, she's utterly bad. Oh dear, I'm afraid Rachel was right from the first. But I put my hand to the plow, and I won't look back." It was a dismal morning. Marla worked fiercely and scrubbed the porch floor and the dairy shelves when she couldn't find nothing else to do. Neither the shelves nor the porch needed it, but Marla did. Then she went out and raked the yard. When dinner was ready, she went to the stairs and called Anne. A tear-stained face appeared, looking tragically over the banisters. "Come down to your dinner, Anne." I don't want any dinner, Marla," said Anne sobbingly. "I couldn't eat anything. My heart is broken. You'll feel remorse of conscience someday, I will expect, for breaking it, Marla. But I forgive you. Remember when the time comes that I forgive you. But please don't ask me to eat anything, especially boiled pork and greens. Boiled pork and greens are so unromantic when one is in affliction." Exasperated, Marla returned to the kitchen and poured out her tale of woe to Matthew, who, between his sense of justice and his unlawful sympathy with Anne, was a miserable man. "Well, now, she shouldn't have taken the brooch, Marla, or told stories about it," he admitted, mournfully surveying his plateful of unromantic pork and greens, as if he, like Anne, thought it a food ill-suited to a crisis of feeling. "But she's such a little thing, such an interesting little thing. Don't you think it's pretty rough not to let her go to the picnic when she's so set on it?" "Matthew Cuthbert, I'm amazed at you. I think I've let her off entirely too easy, and she doesn't appear to realize how wicked she's been. That's what worries me most. If she's really felt sorry, it wouldn't be so bad. And you don't seem to realize it either. You're making excuses for her all the time to yourself. I can see that." "Well, now she's such a little thing," feebly reiterated Matthew. "And there should be allowances made, Marla. You know she's never had any bringing up. Well, she's having it now, retorted Marilla. The retort silenced Matthew, if it did not convince him. That dinner was a very dismal meal. The only cheerful thing about it was Jerry Boat, the hired boy, and Marilla resented his cheerfulness as a personal insult. When her dishes were washed and her bread sponge set and her hens fed, Marilla remembered that she had noticed a small rent in her best black lace shawl when she had taken it off Monday afternoon on returning from the Ladies' Aid. She would go and mend it. The shawl was in a box in her trunk. As Marilla lifted it out, the sunlight, falling through the vines that clustered thickly about the window, struck upon something caught in the shawl. Something that glittered and sparkled in facets of violet light. Marilla snatched at it with a gasp. It was the amethyst brooch, hanging on to a thread of the lace by its catch. Dear life and heart, said Marilla blankly. What does this mean? Here is my brooch, safe and sound, that I thought was at the bottom of Barry's pond. Whatever did that girl mean by saying that she had took and lost it? I declare I believe Green Gables is bewitched. I remember now that when I took off my shawl Monday afternoon, I lay it on the bureau for a minute. I suppose the brooch got caught in it somehow. Well! Marilla betook herself to the east gable, brooch in hand. Anne had cried herself out and was sitting dejectedly by the window. Anne Shirley, said Marilla solemnly, I've just found my brooch hanging to my black lace shawl. Now I want to know what that rigmarole you told me this morning meant. Why, you said you'd keep me here until I confessed, returned Anne wearily. And so I decided to confess because I was bound to get to the picnic. I thought out a confession last night after I went to bed and made it interesting as I could, and I went over it so that I wouldn't forget it. But you wouldn't let me go to the picnic after all, so my trouble was wasted. Marilla had to laugh in spite of herself, but her conscience pricked her. And you do beat all. But I was wrong. I see that now. I shouldn't have doubted your word when I have never known you to tell a story. Of course, it wasn't right for you to confess to a thing you hadn't done. It was very wrong to do so, but I drove you to it. So if you'll forgive me, Anne, I'll forgive you, and we'll start square again. And now, get yourself ready for the picnic. Anne flew up like a rocket. Oh, Marilla, isn't it too late? No, it's only 2 o'clock. They won't have been more than well half gathered yet, and it'll be an hour before they have tea. Wash your face, comb your hair, and put on your gingham. I'll fill a basket for you. There's plenty of stuff baked in the house. And I'll get Jerry to hitch up the sorrel and drive you down to the picnic ground. Oh, Marilla! Exclaimed Anne, flying to the washstand. 5 minutes ago I was so miserable. I was wishing I'd never been born, and now I want to change places with an angel. That night, a thoroughly happy, completely tired out Anne returned to Green Gables in a state of beautification impossible to describe. Oh, Marilla, I've had a perfectly scrumptious time. Scrumptious is a new word I learned today. I heard Mary Alice Bell use it. Isn't it very expressive? Everything was lovely. We had a splendid tea, and then Mr. Harmon Andrews took us all for a row on the Lake of Shining Waters, 6 of us at a time. And Jane Andrews nearly fell overboard. She was leaning out to pick water lilies, and if Mr. Andrews hadn't caught her by her sash just in the nick of time, she would have fallen in and probably drowned. I wish it had been me. It would have been such a romantic experience to have been nearly drowned, and it would be such a thrilling tale to tell. And then we had the ice cream. Words fail to describe that ice cream. Marilla, I assure you, it was sublime. That evening, Marilla told the whole story to Andrew over her stocking basket. I'm willing to own up that I made a mistake, she concluded candidly, but I've learned a lesson. I suppose I have to laugh when I think of Anne's confession. Although I suppose I really shouldn't, for it really was a falsehood. But it doesn't seem as bad as the other would have been somehow. And anyhow, I'm responsible for it. That child is hard to understand in some respects, but I believe she'll turn out all right yet. And there's one thing for certain, no house will ever be dull with her that she's in it. Chapter 15, A Tempest in the School Teapot. What a splendid day, said Anne, drawing a long breath. Isn't it good to just be alive on a day like this? I pity the people who aren't born yet for missing it. They may have good days, of course, but they can never have this one. And it's splendidly still to have such a lovely way to go to school by, isn't it? It's a lot nicer than going round by the road. That's so dusty and hot, said Diana practically, peeping into her dinner basket and mentally calculating if the 3 juicy, toothsome raspberry tarts reposing there were divided among 10 girls, how many bites would each girl have? The little girls of Avonlea School always pooled their lunches, and to eat 3 raspberry tarts all alone, or even to share them only with one's best chum, would have forever and ever branded as awful mean the girl who did it. And yet, when the tarts were divided among 10 girls, you got just enough to tantalize you. The way that Anne and Diana went to school was a pretty one. Anne thought those walks to and from the school with Diana couldn't be improved upon even by imagination. Going around by the main road would have been so unromantic, but to go by Lover's Lane and Willowmere and Violet Vale and the Birch Path was romantic, if anything ever was. Lover's Lane opened up below the orchard at Green Gables and stretched up far into the woods to the end of the Cuthbert farm. It was the way by which the cows were taken to the back pasture and the wood hauled home in the winter. Anne had named it Lover's Lane before she had been a month at Green Gables. Not that lovers ever really walk there, she explained to Marilla, but Diana and I are reading a perfectly magnificent book, and there's a Lover's Lane in it, so we want to have one too. And it's such a pretty name, don't you think? So romantic. We can imagine the lovers onto it, you know. I like that lane because you can think out loud there without people calling you crazy. Anne, starting out alone in the mornings, went down Lover's Lane as far as the brook. Here, Diana met her, and the 2 little girls went up the lane under the leafy arch of maples. Maples are such sociable trees, said Anne. They're always rustling and whispering to you. Until they came to a rustic bridge. Then they left the lane and walked through Mr. Barry's backfield and past Willowmere. Beyond Willowmere came Violet Vale, a little green dimple in the shadow of Mr. Andrew Bell's big woods. Of course there are no violets there now, Anne told Marilla, but Diana says there are millions of them in the spring. Oh, Marilla, can't you just imagine you see them? It actually takes my breath away. I named it Violet Vale. Diana said she never saw the beat of me for hitting on so fancy names for places. It's nice to be clever at something, isn't it? But Diana named the Birch Path. She wanted to, so I let her, but I'm sure I could have found something more poetical than plain Birch Path. Anyone can think of a name like that. The Birch Path is the prettiest place in the world, Marilla. It was. Other people besides Anne thought so when they stumbled on it. It was a narrow, twisting path winding down over a long hill straight through Mr. Bell's woods, where the light came down sifted through so many emerald screens that it was as flawless as the heart of a diamond. It was fringed in all its length with slim young birches, white-stemmed and lissom, browed ferns and starflowers and wild lilies of the valleys, and tufts of pigeonberries grew thickly along it. And always there was a delightful spiciness in the air, and the music of bird calls and the murmur and laugh of wind woods in the trees overhead. Now and then you might see a rabbit skipping across the road if you were quiet, which, with Anne and Diana, happened about once in a blue moon. Down in the valley, the path came out to the main road, and then it was just up the spruce hill to the school. The Avonlea School was a whitewashed building, low in the eaves and wide in the windows, furnished inside with comfortable, substantial, old-fashioned desks that open and shut, and were carved all over their lids with the initials and hieroglyphs of 3 generations of school children. The schoolhouse was set back from the road, and behind it was a dusky fir wood and a brook where all the children put their bottles of milk in the morning to keep cool and sweet until dinner hour. Marilla had seen Anne start off to school on the first day of September with many secret misgivings. Anne was such an odd girl. How would she get on with the other children? And how on earth would she ever manage to hold her tongue during school hours? Things went better than Marilla feared, however. Anne came home that evening in high spirits. "I think I'm gonna like school here," she announced. "I don't think much of the master, though. He's all the time curling his mustache and making eyes at Prissy Andrews. Prissy is a grown-up, you know. She's 16, and she's studying for the entrance examination into Queen's Academy at Charlottetown next year. Tilly Boulder says that the master is dead gone on her. She's got a beautiful complexion and curly brown hair, and she does it up so elegantly. She sits in the long seat at the back, and he sits there too, most of the time, to explain her lessons, he says. But Ruby Gillis says that she saw him writing something on her slate, and when Prissy read it, she blushed red as a beet and giggled, and Ruby Gillis says she doesn't believe it had anything to do with the lesson." "Anne Shirley, don't let me hear you talking about your teacher in that way again," said Marilla sharply. "You don't go to school to criticize the master. I guess he can teach you something, and it's your business to learn. And I want you to understand right off that you are not to come home telling tales about him. That's something I won't encourage. I hope you were a good girl." "Indeed I was," said Anne comfortably. "It wasn't so hard as you might imagine either. I sit with Diana. Our seat is right by the window, and we can look down to the Lake of Shining Waters. There are lots of nice girls in school, and we had scrumptious fun playing at dinner time. It's so nice to have lots of little girls to play with. But of course, I like Diana best, and I always will. I adore Diana. I'm dreadfully far behind the others. They're all in the 5th book, and I'm only in the 4th. I feel that it's kind of a disgrace that not one of them has such an imagination as I have, and I soon found that out. We had reading and geography and Canadian history and dictation today. Mr. Phillips said that my spelling was disgraceful, and he held up my slate so that everyone could see it, all marked over. I felt so mortified, Marilla. He might have been politer to a stranger, I think. Ruby Gillis gave me an apple, and Sophia Sloane lent me a lovely pink card with a "May I see you home" on it. I'm to give it back to her tomorrow. Then Tilly Boulter let me wear her bead ring all the afternoon. Can I have some of those pearl beads off of the old pin cushion in the garnet to make myself a ring? And oh, Martha! Jane Andrews told me that Minnie McPherson told her that she heard Prissy Andrews tell Sarah Gillis that I had a very pretty nose. Martha, that is the first compliment that I have ever had in my life, and you can't imagine what a strange feeling it gave me. Martha, have I really a pretty nose? I know you'll tell me the truth. Your nose is well enough, said Marilla shortly. Secretly, she thought Anne's nose was a remarkably pretty one, but she had no intention of telling her so. That was 3 weeks ago, and all had gone smoothly so far. And now, this crisp September morning, Anne and Diana were tripping blithely down the birch path as 2 of the happiest little girls in Avonlea. I guess Gilbert Blythe will be in school today, said Diana. He's been visiting his cousins over in New Brunswick all summer, and he only came home Saturday night. He's awfully handsome, Anne, and he teases the girls something terrible. He just torments our lives out. Diana's tone indicated that she rather liked having her life tormented out than not. Gilbert Blythe, said Anne. Isn't it his name that's written up on the porch wall with Julia Bell's and a big "Take Notice" over them? Yes, said Diana, tossing her head. But I'm sure he doesn't like Julia Bell so very much. I've heard him say he studied the multiplication tables by her freckles. Oh, don't speak of freckles to me, implored Anne. It isn't delicate when I've got so many. But I do think that writing take-up notices on the wall about the boys and girls is the silliest ever. I should just like to see anybody dare to write my name up with the boys. Not, of course, she hastened to add, that anybody would. Anne sighed. She didn't want her name written up, but it was a little humiliating to know that there was no danger of it. Nonsense, said Diana, whose black eyes and glossy tresses had played such havoc with the boys of Avonlea schoolboys that her name figured on the porch walls in half a dozen take notices. It's only meant as a joke. And don't you be so sure that your name won't ever be written up. Charlie Sloane is dead gone on you. He told his mother, mind you, that you were the smartest girl in school. That's better than being good looking. No, it isn't, said Anne, feminine to the core. I'd rather be pretty than clever, and I hate Charlie Sloane. I can't bear a boy with goggle eyes. If anyone wrote my name up with his, I'd never get over it, Diana Barry. But it is nice to keep head of your class. You'll have Gilbert in your class after this, said Diana. And he's used to being head of his class, I can tell you. He's only in the 4th book, although he's nearly 14. 4 years ago, his father was sick and had to go out to Alberta for his health, and Gilbert went with him. They were there 3 years, and Gil didn't go to school hardly any until after they came back. You won't find it so easy to keep head after this, Anne. I'm glad, said Anne quickly. I couldn't really feel proud of keeping head of little boys and girls of just 9 or 10. I got up yesterday spelling Eolabushin. Josie Pye was head, and mind you, she peeped in her book. Mr. Phillips didn't see her. He was looking at Prissy Andrews, but I did. I just swept her a look of freezing scorn, and she got red as a beet and spelled it wrong after all. Those Pye girls are cheats all around, said Diana indignantly as they climbed the fence of the main road. Gertie Pye actually went and put her milk bottle in my place in the brook now. Did you ever? I don't speak to her now. When Mr. Phillips was in the back of the room hearing Prissy Andrews' Latin, Diana whispered to Anne, That's Gilbert Blythe sitting right across the aisle from you, Anne. Just look at him and see if you don't think he's handsome. Anne looked accordingly. She had a good chance to do so, for the said Gilbert Blythe was absorbed in stealthily pinning the long yellow braid of Ruby Gillis, who sat in front of him, to the back of her seat. He was a tall boy with curly brown hair, roguish hazel eyes, and a mouth twisted up into a teasing smile. Presently, Ruby Gillis started up to take his son to the master. She fell back in her seat with a little shriek, believing that her hair was being pulled out by the roots. Everyone looked at her, and Mr. Phillips glared so sternly that Ruby began to cry. Gilbert had whisked the pin out of sight and was studying his history with the soberest face in the world. But when the commotion subsided, he looked at Anne and winked with impressionable dolitry. I think your Gilbert Blythe is handsome, confided Anne to Diana, but I think he's bold. It isn't good manners to wink at a strange girl. But it was not until that afternoon that things really began to happen. Mr. Phillips was in the back corner, explaining a problem in algebra to Prissy Andrews, and the rest of the scholars were doing pretty much as they pleased, eating green apples, whispering, drawing pictures on their slates, and driving crickets harnessed to strings up and down the aisles. Gilbert Blythe was trying to make Anne Shirley look at him, and failing utterly, because Anne was at that very moment totally oblivious, not only to the very existence of Gilbert Blythe, but of every other scholar in Avonlea School, and of Avonlea School itself. With her chin propped up in her hands, and her eyes fixed on the blue glimpse of the lake of shining waters that the west window afforded, she was far away in a gorgeous dreamland, hearing and seeing nothing save her own wonderful visions. Gilbert Blythe wasn't used to putting himself out to make a girl look at him and meeting with failure. She should look at him, that red-haired Shirley girl with the pointed little chin and the big eyes that weren't like the eyes of any other girl in Avonlea school. Gilbert reached across the aisle, picked up the end of Anne's long red braid, held it out at arm's length, and said in a piercing whisper, "Carrots, carrots!" Then Anne looked at him with a vengeance. She did more than look. She sprang to her feet, her bright fancies fallen into cureless ruin. She flashed one indignant glance at Gilbert, from whose eyes angry sparkle was swiftly quenched in equally angry tears. You mean, hateful boy!" she exclaimed passionately. "How dare you!" And then, thwack! Anne brought her slate down on Gilbert's head and cracked it. Slate, not the head, clear across. Avonlea School always enjoyed a scene. This was an especially enjoyable one. Everyone said, "Oh!" in horrified delight. Diana gasped. Ruby Gillis, who was inclined to be hysterical, began to cry. Tommy Sloane let his team of crickets escape him altogether, while he stared open-mouthed at the tableau. Mr. Phillips stalked down the aisle and laid his hand heavily on Anne's shoulder. "Anne Shirley, what does this mean?" he said angrily. Anne returned no answer. It was asking too much of a flesh and blood to expect her to tell before the whole school that she had been called carrots. Gilbert it was who spoke up stoutly. "It was my fault, Mr. Phillips. I teased her." Mr. Phillips paid no heed to Gilbert. "I'm sorry to see a pupil of mine displaying such a temper and such a vindictive spirit," he said in a solemn tone, as if the mere fact of being a pupil of his ought to root all evil passions from the heart of small imperfect mortals. "And go and stand on the platform in front of the blackboard for the rest of the afternoon." Anne would have indefinitely heard a whipping to this punishment, under which her sensitive spirit quivered as from a whiplash. With a white, set face she obeyed. Mr. Phillips took a chalk crayon and wrote on the blackboard above her head, "Anne Shirley has a very bad temper. Anne Shirley must learn to control her temper," and then read it out loud so even the primer class, who couldn't read writing, should understand it. Anne stood there the rest of the afternoon with that legend above her. She did not cry nor hang her head. Anger was still too hot in her heart for that, and it sustained her amid all of her agony of humiliation. With resentful eyes and passion-red cheeks, she confronted alike Diana's sympathetic gaze and Charlie Sloane's indignant nods and Josie Pye's malicious smiles. As for Gilbert Blythe, she would not even look at him. She would never look at him again. She would never speak to him. When school was dismissed, Anne marched out with her red hair head high. Gilbert Blythe tried to intercept her at the porch door. "I'm awful sorry I made fun of your hair, Anne," he whispered contritely. "Honest, I am. Don't be mad for keeps, now." Anne swept distastefully by, without looking or sight of hearing. "Oh, how could you, Anne?" breathed Diana as they went down the road, half reproachingly, half admiringly. And Diana felt that she could have never resisted Gilbert's plea. "I shall never forgive Gilbert Blythe," said Anne firmly. "And Mr. Phillips spelled my name without an E, too. The iron has entered my soul, Diana." Diana hadn't the least idea what Anne meant, but she understood it was something terrible. "You mustn't mind Gilbert for making fun of your hair," she said soothingly. "Why, he makes fun of all the girls. He laughs at mine because it's so black. He called me a crow a dozen times, and I've never heard him apologize for anything before either. There's a great deal of difference between being called a crow and being called carrots, said Anne with dignity. Gilbert Blythe has hurt my feelings excruciatingly, Diana. It is possible that the matter might have blown over without more excruciation if nothing else had happened. But when things begin to happen, they're apt to happen odd. Avonlea scholars often spent noon hour picking gum in Mr. Bell's spruce grove over the hill and across his big pasture field. From there, they could keep an eye on Eben Bright's house, where the master boarded. When they saw Mr. Phillips emerging therefrom, they ran for the schoolhouse. But the distance being about 3 times longer than Mr. Bright's lane, they were apt to arrive there, breathless and gasping, some 3 minutes too late. On the following day, Mr. Phillips was seized with one of his spasmodic fits of reform, and announced before going home to dinner that he should expect to find all of the scholars in their seats when he returned. Anyone who came in late would be punished. All of the boys and some of the girls went to Mr. Bell's pasture grove as usual, fully intending to stay only long enough to pick a chew. But spruce groves are seductive, and yellow nuts of gum beguiling. They picked and loitered and strayed, and as usual, the first thing that recalled him to the sense of the flight of time was Jimmy Glover, shouting from the top of a patriarchal old spruce, "Master's coming!" The girls, who were on the ground, started first and managed to reach the schoolhouse in time, but without a second to spare. The boys, who had to wriggle hastily down from the trees, were later, and Anne, who had not been picking gum at all, but was wandering happily in the far end of the grove, waist deep among the bracken, singing softly to herself, with a wreath of bright lilies in her hair, as if she were some wild divinity of the shadowy places, was latest of all. Anne could run like a deer, however. Run she did, with the impish result that she overtook the boys at the door and was swept into the schoolhouse among them, just as Mr. Phillips was in the act of hanging up his hat. Mr. Phillips' brief reforming energy was over. He didn't want the bother of punishing a dozen pupils, but it was necessary to do something to save his word, so he looked about for a scapegoat and found it in Anne, who had dropped into her seat, gasping for breath, with her forgotten lily wreath hanging askew over one ear and giving her a particularly rakish and disheveled appearance. "Anne Shirley, since you seem to be so fond of the boys' company, we shall indulge your taste for it this afternoon," he said sarcastically. "Take those flowers out of your hair and sit with Gilbert Blythe." The other boys snickered. Diana, turning pale with pity, plucked the wreath from Anne's hair and squeezed her hand. Anne stared at the master as if turned to stone. "Did you hear what I said, Anne?" queried Mr. Phillips sternly. "Yes, sir," said Anne slowly, "but I didn't suppose you really meant it." "I assure you I did," still with their sarcastic inflection, which all the children, and Anne especially, hated. It flicked on their arm. "Obey me at once." For a moment, Anne looked as if she meant to disobey. Then, realizing there was no help for it, she rose haughtily, stepped across the aisle, sat down beside Gilbert Blythe, and buried her face in her arms on the desk. Ruby Gillis, who got a glimpse of it as it went down, told the others going home from school that she had actually never seen anything like it, and was so white with awful little red spots on it. To Anne, this was the end of all things. It was bad enough to be singled out for punishment from among a dozen equally guilty ones. It was worse still to be sent to sit with a boy, but that boy should be Gilbert Blythe was heaping insult onto injury to a degree utterly unbearable. Anne felt that she could not bear it and would be of no use to try. Her whole being seethed with shame and anger and humiliation. At first, the scholars looked and whispered and giggled and nudged. But as Anne never lifted her head, and as Gilbert worked fractions as if his whole soul was absorbed in them only, they soon returned to their tasks, and Anne was forgotten. When Mr. Phillips called the history class out, Anne should have gone, but Anne did not move. And Mr. Phillips, who had been writing some verses to Priscilla before he called the class, was thinking about an obstinate rhyme still, and never missed her. Once, when nobody was looking, Gilbert took from his desk a little pink candy heart with a gold motto on it, "You are sweet," and slipped it under the curve of Anne's arm. Whereupon Anne arose, took the pink heart gingerly between the tips of her fingers, dropped it on the floor, and ground it to powder beneath her heel, and resumed her position without designing to bestow a glance on Gilbert. When school went out, Anne marched to her desk, ostentationally took out everything therein, books and writing tablet, pen and ink, testament and arithmetic, and piled them neatly on her cracked slate. "What are you taking those home for, Anne?" Diana wanted to know as soon as they were out on the road. She had dared not ask the question before. "I'm not coming back to school anymore," said Anne. Diana gasped and stared at Anne to see if she meant it. "Will Marilla let you stay home?" she asked. "She'll have to," said Anne. "I'll never go to school to that man again." "Oh, Anne!" Diana looked as if she was ready to cry. "I do think that you're mean. What shall I do? Mr. Phillips will make me sit with that horrid Gertie Pye. I know he will because she's sitting alone. Do come back, Anne." "I'd do almost anything in the world for you, Diana," said Anne sadly. "I'd let myself be torn limb from limb if that would do you any good. But I can't do this, so please don't ask me it. You'll harrow up my very soul." "Just think of the fun you'll miss," mourned Diana. "We're gonna build the loveliest new house down by the brook, and we'll be playing ball next week, and you've never played ball, Anne. It's tremendously exciting. We're gonna learn a new song. Jane Andrews is practicing it up now, and Alice Andrews is going to bring a new Patsy book next week, and we're all gonna read it out loud, a chapter about Down by the Brook. And you know you're so fond of reading out loud, Anne." Nothing moved Anne in the least. Her mind was made up. She would not go to school to Mr. Phillips again. She told Marilla so when she got home. "Nonsense," said Marilla. "It isn't nonsense at all," said Anne, gazing at Marilla with solemn, reproachful eyes. "Don't you understand, Marilla? I've been insulted." "Insulted fiddlesticks. You'll go to school tomorrow as usual." "Oh, no." Anne shook her head gently. "I'm not going back, Marilla. I'll learn my lessons at home, and I'll be as good as can be, and I'll hold my tongue all the time if it's possible at all. But I will not go back to school, I assure you." Marilla saw something remarkably like unyielding stubbornness looking out of Anne's small face. She understood that she would have trouble in overcoming it, but she resolved wisely to say nothing more just then. "I'll run down and see Rachel about it this evening," she thought. "There's no use reasoning with Anne now. She's too worked up, and I've an idea she can be awful stubborn if she takes the notion. Far as I can make out from her story, Mr. Phillips has been carrying matters with a rather high hand, but it would never do to say it to her. I'll just talk it over with Rachel. She sent 10 children to school, and she ought to know something about it. She'll have heard the whole story by now, too, by this time." Marilla found Mrs. Lynde knitting quilts as industriously and cheerfully as usual. "I suppose you know what I've come about," she said, a little shamefacedly. Mrs. Rachel nodded. "About Anne's fuss in school, I suppose. Tilly Buller was on her way home from school and told me all about it." "I don't know what to do with her," said Marilla. She declares she won't go back to school. I never saw a child so worked up. I've been expecting trouble ever since she started to school. I knew things were going too smooth to last. She's so high-strung. What would you advise, Rachel? Well, since you asked my advice, Marilla, said Mrs. Lynde amicably. Mrs. Lynde dearly loved to be asked for advice. I just humor her a little at first. That's what I do. It's my belief that Mr. Phillip was in the wrong. Of course, it doesn't do to say so to the children, you know. And, of course, he did right to punish her yesterday for giving way to temper. But today it was different. The others who were late should have been punished as well as Anne. That's what. And I don't believe in making the girls sit with the boys for punishment. It isn't honest. Tilly Boulter was real indignant. She took Anne's part right through and said all of the scholars did too. Anne seems real popular among them somehow. I never thought she'd take with them so well. Then you really think I should better let her stay home? Said Marilla in amazement. Yes. That is, I wouldn't say school to her again until she said it herself. Depend on it, Marilla. She'll cool off in a week or so and be ready enough to go back of her own accord. That's what. Well, if you were to make her go right back, dear knows what freak or tantrum she'd make next and make more trouble than ever. The less fuss made, the better, in my opinion. She won't miss much by not going to school, as far as that goes. Mr. Phillips isn't any good at all as a teacher. The order he keeps is scandalous, and that's what, and he neglects the young fry and puts all his time on those big scholars he's getting ready for Queen's. He'd have never got the school for another year if his uncle hadn't been a trustee. The trustee, for he just leads the other two about by the nose, that's what. I declare, I don't know what education in this island is coming to. Mrs. Rachel shook her head, as much to say if she were only at the head of the educational system of the province, things would be much better managed. Marilla took Mrs. Rachel's advice, and not another word was said to Anne about going back to school. She learned her lessons at home, did her chores, and played with Diana in the chilly purple autumn twilights. But when she met Gilbert Blythe on the road or encountered him in Sunday school, she passed him by with an icy contempt that was no whit thwarted by his evident desire to appease her. Anne had evidently made up her mind to hate Gilbert Blythe to the end of life. Much as she hated Gilbert, however, did she love Diana with all the love of her passionate little heart, equally intense in all of its likes and dislikes. One evening, Marilla, coming in from the orchard with the basket of apples, found Anne sitting alone by the east window in the twilight, crying bitterly. "Whatever is the matter now, Anne?" she asked. "It's about Diana," sobbed Anne luxuriously. "I love Diana so, Marilla. I can't ever live without her. But I know very well when we grow up that Diana will get married and go away and leave me. And oh, what shall I do? I'll hate her husband. I just hate him furiously. I've been imagining it all out, the wedding and everything. Diana dressed in snowy garments with a veil and looking as beautiful and as regal as a queen, and me, the bridesmaid, with a lovely dress too, and puffed sleeves, but with a breaking heart hid beneath my smiling face, and then bidding Diana goodbye." Here Anne broke down entirely and wept with increasing bitterness. Aunt Marilla turned quickly away to hide her twitching face, but it was no use. She collapsed on the nearest chair and burst into such a hearty and unusual peal of laughter that Matthew, crossing the yard, hailed in amazement. When had he heard Marilla laugh like that before? "Well, Anne Shirley," said Marilla as soon as she could speak, "if you must borrow trouble, for pity's sake borrow it handy your home. I should think you had an imagination, sure enough." And that is the end of today's chapter. So I'll post the question here, and then I will also post it on our Facebook page. But Have you ever been unjustly punished for something? So like Anne being punished by Marilla for losing the brooch even though it wasn't her fault, or Anne being punished for being late even though all of the boys were too. Drop a comment below or go over to the Facebook page and drop a comment there. Have a great rest of your day and stay safe, everybody. Bye!